Does Spellbreaker have a place in PvE? The short answer is not really. I presume you came here though for the long answer, so here goes. Spellbreaker is primarily a PvP and World v World spec. Almost all of the utility skills and most of the traits revolve around punishing enemies for attacking you or for having boons. In fact, the main class mechanic is an adrenaline-powered burst skill that functions as a block and an interrupt. Boon punishment, interrupts, and copious blocks are all mechanics that are very powerful in PvP and World v World, but have limited use in PvE. Some people have pointed out, myself included, that the first two challenge mode fractals we got, the bosses all had boon applications that were rather annoying, and being able to strip them was very advantageous to your team, especially if using a power class, since protection was one of the boons. People have put it out there that a boon punishing class does have a space here to interact in a good way. A lot of people have speculated that with POF, the design will be that based heavily around boons and boon destruction, and we're likely to see PvE mobs in the open world with boons, and likely boons on bosses will be a feature of the design of the new raid wing. Unfortunately, even if all this is correct, it doesn't necessarily mean that Spellbreaker makes it. For starters, if it becomes a requirement for raids or fractals to have a boon destroyer on the team, Spellbreaker is not really the one to do it. Scourge or even Reaper are superior at boon removal, mostly because their boon corrupts tend to apply more damage in the form of conditions, which synergizes with their build a little bit better. Not even to mention that Scourge can destroy more boons than anyone else and punish them harder for it, and Scourge gives up almost no personal DPS to do so. The DPS drop from a Berserker Warrior, like a Con DPS, going to Spellbreaker, just for the sake of ripping boons is huge. The DPS drop from Reaper to Scourge will be relatively small, if it's even a drop at all. Simply put, in a PvE context, Scourge is best in slot at boon ripping. Now, before everybody gets bummed out, let me say this. This isn't a bad thing. We are about to live in a world where classes have multiple elite specs to pick from. It would just be too hard to balance a situation where all elite specs were equally good in every game mode at every role. In fact, what would be the point of them even existing if they were all perfectly equal at everything? When we only had one elite spec, it was totally reasonable that this spec would be an upgrade over the base class at pretty much every game mode. But now that we have choices, it makes sense that some of the specs will simply outperform the alternative at different things. In our case, Spellbreaker is likely going to simply outperform Berserker in PvP, and is definitely going to outperform it in World v World. The saving grace here is that Berserker is likely to be the superior choice in PvE. Instead of elite specs being a power creep race to the top, they will instead become highly specialized tools, and you'll select the right tool for the job. For now, for Warrior, it's relatively simple dynamic between the game modes. The next round of elite specs could add a lot more variety. Perhaps the next spec allows us to play a pure power DPS build in PvE, which is a role currently unavailable to Warrior. Perhaps the next spec creates a healing support role that is great in raids and PvP, but bad in World v World. The point is, it's not a bad thing that the Spellbreaker isn't designed for endgame PvE. On some level, of course, I would have loved had I been able to play a pure power DPS dagger-wielding warrior in raids. But as hard as it is to admit, I have to look a bit more objectively at what's best for the game in the long term. And in my opinion, what's best is more specialized elite specs that are built to excel at one particular function and aren't superior to the others at every single role. This is a long-term design vision, I'm sure, and perhaps in a few years, when every profession has 3 or more elite specs, it will be a really satisfying place to be. For now, we have to understand that if you are strictly a PvE player, or strictly a World v World player, or strictly a PvP player, that a new elite spec doesn't automatically mean you're getting an upgrade. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed demoing the specs this weekend. I will have more to say about some of the other specs when I do live streams and stuff. But this is really what I wanted to put out there for Spellbreaker, because I know a lot of people were looking forward to that from me. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.